And chemical tests done on this previously molten metal determined that it is not, in fact, structural steel. It's not aluminum from the melted airplane. It's molten iron. Iron is not used in structures for the last 100 years or so. And yet here's this molten iron. Where did it come from? Well, it has in it the chemical evidence of thermite, an incendiary used to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. This thermite ejects vast quantities of molten iron as its byproduct. So we have a source for the molten iron, and the previously molten iron has in it the chemical evidence of aluminum, manganese, other components that are, associated in those proportions only with thermite. So it's very clear what's going on here. And not only that, FEMA themselves, who did the first real building performance assessment report, that came out in May of 2002, their Appendix C documents in the only two pieces of steel that were saved from this building structure. They document intergranular melting, rapid oxidation, sulfidation, and evaporation of the ends of these beams. They document the molten iron invasion of the grain boundaries of the steel. This is another separate, clear, convincing piece of evidence that says something happened to the steel that does not happen in ordinary office fires.
Now, tell me, who actually came up with that estimate?
This is FEMA, the analysis done in Appendix C of their Building Performance Assessment Report, official sources documenting the melting and hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel.
Now, basically, did FEMA then actually prepare the report on why the building come down? Is that the part?
Yeah, they oversaw this. In fact, they also oversaw the destruction, the illegal destruction of the steel. This is a crime scene. And this is a building that is built like many others throughout our country. And we have a need to know how a few small fires brought down a massive building like this. Never happened before in history. Over 100 steel frame high-rise fires, not one has collapsed at all. And in much larger, hotter, and longer-lasting fires. So we have a need to understand, lay out the forensic do a forensic analysis on this structural steel, but it was all shipped to China for recycling.
But the thing is that this was basically a crime scene. There were, close to a couple of thousand, 2,500 people who died there in the Twin Towers. So this was a crime scene and should have been maintained till it was thoroughly evaluated. So didn't anybody from the police say, well, we want to thoroughly evaluate this before you remove the evidence?
Well, the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine was certainly screaming about it. He says crucial evidence that could explain these mysteries, huge mysteries, is on its way, a slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough and a scientific investigation. He says the illegal destruction of evidence must stop immediately. This is the magazine that ties all of our fire protection engineers together across the country. So people were up in arms at what was going on here. So it's obviously by itself evidence of a cover-up, the way this steel was shipped away. And only 230 pieces of steel or so were saved from the Twin Towers. So it's a huge problem for those. That's one of the reasons we're calling, one of many, for a federal grand jury investigation of John Gross and Sham Sunder, lead investigators at NIST.
Well, of course, they're never going to get an investigation from the federal, certainly Attorney General, the Obama Attorney General, or certainly George Bush's Attorney General. But couldn't a state or even a local community require an investigation because of the fact that people died here? And there's a serious question that this was murder?
Yes, there's jurisdiction in other states. Yes, that's absolutely correct. And we're looking for an opportunity to present this evidence in any court case that can be brought up. So there's a lot of people looking, for such opportunities.
How about
9/11 Truth Movement.
Right, of course, and this is the thing. There was hope that Elliot Spitzer would have the courage. He was the Attorney General of the state of New York, and he could have investigated, but of course, I guess he had too many skeletons or girlfriends in the closet. He didn't dare get too far out of line, and they still destroyed him. But anyway, of course, is there anything new as far as the investigation is concerned? Certainly the finding of the thermite, this was something that took quite a while before the information came out. It was only when people actually began to look at the dust samples. They did everything to clean up all of the evidence so there'd be nothing left. Of course, it was a criminal act to take anything from the 9/11 site. People, even people working there were not allowed to take anything out. They didn't want any evidence left over, but there were 1,100 bodies that were vaporized that day. Just vaporized. Has anybody ever commented on that?
Well, millions of people across the country have commented on it, but the media doesn't pick it up. We have a problem with our media. There's journalists here and there who get wind of this story, and then it gets blocked from being printed. We have 5 corporations owning 90% of the mainstream media in the United States. It's a very sad state of affairs for freedom of the press. You mentioned 1,100 people completely unaccounted for. I mean, just disappeared. Now, realize that that's given that we have 20,000 pieces of bodies found, and 6,000 of them are small enough to fit into a tent, and yet there's still 1,100 people unaccounted for.
Well, I figured they were just vaporized, just like they vaporized the cement. And certainly if this had been a pancake collapse, well, you have had a lot of big chunks of cement, but you wouldn't have vaporized it.
Yeah, we have 90,000 tons of concrete in each of these twin towers, and it is turned to basically the consistency of talcum powder. Very fine powder laid like a blanket throughout lower Manhattan, 4 to 12 inches thick, all across the island. It's rather amazing. But also, there are 700 bone fragments found on top of the skyscraper, 2 blocks, 300 feet away from the Twin Towers. They're the size of a grain of rice. I mean, think about this. It's absolutely astounding. This concrete in the floors was poured in huge metal decks that were an acre in size, each of them, 110 of them stacked up. How many of those with concrete end up at the bottom of either of these piles in what we're told was a gravitational structural collapse? Not one. They are all systematically pulverized. There's fine metal filings found in each of the, in all of the dust throughout lower Manhattan. I mean, it's incredible.
Well, we just have to try to get people to think. It's so very difficult to say, you got to believe your eyes, you got to believe what the government tells you. I mean, because this is a defining moment for America. This changed the course of our nation forever. Got the Patriot Act passed, got us into war in the Middle East, which led first to an invasion of Afghanistan, then to an invasion of Iraq. I think there's a growing number of people who know that something's seriously wrong. I think they're represented by the Tea Party movement, about 18% of the population. But even people who aren't necessarily part of the Tea Party, an awful lot of them know something is wrong. They don't know how to verbalize it, and they know if they speak out, they're going to be demonized and attacked and vilified by the controlled media. So most people, are not going to do it. If you work for a newspaper, I've talked to newspaper editors who told me, look, if I told the truth, I'd lose my job tomorrow. I've been told that by people who work in radio. If I told the truth, I'd lose my job tomorrow. And of course, so they want to keep their job. They go right along with the scam. But do you think we're making headway?
Yes. In 4 years, there's a huge difference in attitude. And everybody you talk to in the 9/11 Truth Movement, it's growing by millions every year, too.